Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. Today I want to go more in-depth about how I produce the drum sounds on my album, Find a Way. First of all, I'm not a drummer. I don't have the ability or the equipment to record live drums myself here in the studio. So I had to spend a lot of time developing a process to get the drum sound that I was after for this album. It's a process that I continue to refine and use on other productions to this day. Because I wanted a live feel to the drums, I started by using Logic's drummer feature. Using the Logic drummer as a starting point allows me to get a good groove and a proper sounding drum pattern from the start. It gets that initial idea down in a way that's faster and better than I could ever do by programming it by hand. So I start by calling up a drummer track in Logic and then selecting an appropriate style for the song. I then play around with the beat presets, the nice grid function that it gives you, and the kit sounds until I really lock in on something that feels good for the song I'm working on. On a few tracks, I had hand programmed some patterns as kind of an initial idea. And Logic's drummer makes it super easy to incorporate this idea into the drummer's pattern. You just select the kick and snare follow button and choose which track you want the drummer to follow along to. If you've hand programmed your kick and snare in separate tracks, I do recommend collapsing them down into one guide track for the drummer to follow. You don't have to use this guide track in your mix, but I find it gives more consistent results. Once I had a good initial pattern from the drummer, I then went back and tweaked the MIDI by hand. So to do this, I start by converting the drummer clips into MIDI. To do this, you right-click on the drummer clips in the edit window and select Convert to MIDI region. This allows me to edit the drum pattern as if I had hand-programmed it myself with MIDI. For the album, I often tweaked the kick patterns to lock in better with the bass, and I also changed a lot of the fills to match better what I was hearing in my head. Now that I had a solid drum pattern, it was time to focus on the drum sounds themselves. The drum kit sounds in Logic are pretty good, but for me they're only a starting point. To really dial in the tone that I wanted, I had to layer samples over top of the Logic drummer sounds. And this was a long trial and error process. I wanted to have some consistency to the drum sound from track to track on the album, so there was kind of a cohesion to it all. So deciding on which drum samples I was going to use was a really important decision. After auditioning tons of sounds from my sample library, I finally landed on the kick and snare sounds that I would use throughout the album. I then created a battery kit from these samples. In order to lock these samples in perfectly in time with the drummer track, I would copy the MIDI pattern from the drummer track to a new track that had the battery kit on it. If it was for the kick drums, say, I would delete every MIDI hit except for the kick hits, and thus I would have a new track with my kick sample that was locked perfectly in time with the drummer track. I repeated this process on separate tracks for every different sample that I used. The sample layering process was mostly focused on kicks and snares, but I still wanted to add more depth and color to the cymbals, especially the hi-hats. I find Logic's drummer hi-hat sounds to be a little less than ideal. And that's the one piece of a drum kit that I actually own. So for each song, I would record a live hi-hat track on top of the drummer track. But again, because I'm not a drummer, my playing isn't exactly up to scratch, so I had to use a little bit of a trick to get the recorded hi-hat to match up with the drummer track. So to do this, I would print a copy of the Logic's drummer hi-hat pattern. So I would just solo the hi-hat and print that to a new audio track. I would then use this as a guide track to align my recorded hi-hat via Logic's Groov Track function. So if you don't know about Groov Track, it's really awesome. And how you use it is first you right click on the track name on the left-hand side of the edit window. You go to track header components and then you select Groov Track. Then you can hover your cursor over the track number of the track that you intend to use as the guide. A little star will appear over the track number. You click on the star to set that track as the guide track. Then a tick box will appear beside each track number. You tick the box on the track that you wish to align. In this case, I starred the printed drummer hi-hat and ticked the box on my recorded hi-hat. This automatically quantizes the recorded hi-hat to the timing of the drummer hi-hat. Now I had a perfectly time-locked version of the live hi-hat to add some depth and some color to the sound without any distracting time differences. The final step to my drum production process was adding live percussion. The types of percussion I added varied from song to song. Sometimes it was shaker, tambourine, hand claps, cowbell even, but a little bit of percussion on each song helped to elevate the groove and give certain sections more energy. One trick that I employed with percussion was on my live clap recordings. So recording your own claps can often be a frustrating experience, especially when you're just starting out. When you've heard so many big, lush clap samples in songs, hearing your own recorded hand claps can be super underwhelming. But there are a few tricks that you can use to help out. 1. Record many layers of claps and move around your space while recording them. Don't just stand right in front of the mic for every take. Move back, move forward, move off axis to each side to give some difference to each sound, to each hit. This will help them add together to create a bigger sound instead of stacking on top of each other and almost subtracting from each other. Secondly, you can play with the timing of each clap hit after you record them. For example, here in Saltwater Sea, I have 4 tracks of live claps. The first track I left right in place where I recorded it. The second track I delayed by 10 milliseconds. The third I moved ahead of the beat by 10 milliseconds. And the fourth I delayed by 20 milliseconds. This helps us spread the transients out from each other a bit to give a wider and more impactful overall clap sound. Beyond that, a healthy amount of compression and reverb, as well as a little touch of distortion, can go a long way to making your live claps really sing. And that's basically it. Aside from mixing, that's how I achieved the drum sound on my album Find a Way. You can hear my results for yourself by streaming the album on any streaming service you use right now. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the studio next time. Thanks.